Start with why. That's the advice of Simon Sinek, who studies a lot of inspiring leaders. So I thought it would be important for the leadership section of this talk to speak to the why behind the Nurse Educator Playbook. I vividly remember the day that I was diagnosed. I was sitting in the consult room in the clinic that I had designed. I had been an administrator for a NCCN oncology cancer clinic, a treatment center. And I remember how we labored over the thoughts of the color of the paint, the decor, which stereotactic biopsy table we would purchase, and all of the sundry things that go along with designing a clinic. That was as an administrator. Now I was a patient in that exact same clinic. It was quite a turn of events for me. With my husband on my right, my sister on my left, I waited for the clinical team to come into the consult room and tell me what would be next. What course of treatment would be offered to me? And it was a powerful moment to sit back and think about the journey of a patient. I had 2 children under the age of 10. What would I tell them? How would I communicate to them the next steps that were going to be presented to me? The news was pretty grim. 15% odds of surviving 2 years. So think of that. 100 people in a room, 2 years pass, 15 are left standing. And it was at that moment when I felt very alone, very exposed, and quite confused about what should happen next, even though professionally I had worked in the space for many years. On an emotional and personal level, it was very disorienting. However, at that moment, I decided that I would be bold. I would take big risks, and I would lean into this opportunity to be one of the 15 rather than the other 85. And I know that that's where most of you are today. You're taking a big bet, big risks on the table for how to move these new immunotherapies, advanced medical treatments, regenerative medicines, gene therapies into the clinical space. My advice, be bold, take big risks. When I entered into the clinical space as a patient, I was exposed to a virtual symphony of care. I had a medical oncologist, I had a radiation oncologist, I had a specialized surgeon, I had nutritionist, social worker, laboratorian, nurses. And it was the latter category that I came to lean on particularly acutely and keenly, the nursing team. Part of that was their profession and their skill set with respect to coordinating care, with respect to patient education, with respect to helping manage the symptoms of the treatment as I went through it. So I began to think about the role of nursing when I entered into the next phase as working for a biotech in the first cell-based immunotherapy, Provenge, as we heard earlier today. And I moved into that space when we were going commercial, when we were interacting with the clinical space, with the commercial space, and I had to sit back and think about, once again, how can nursing lead the introduction? Granted, nurses do not prescribe, but they are key in making sure that the navigation happens, education happens, and that the coordination occurs effectively between the different players. Importantly, I think we heard in some of our other discussions earlier, it's important to realize that immunotherapy, cell-based therapy, gene therapy does not occur in a bubble. It happens as it's integrated into the clinical practice. And in another important piece that needs to be considered is how to grapple with failure. And I'm not talking about failure to engraft. I'm not talking about clinical failure. I'm talking about the kind of failure where the process doesn't go the way you expected it to, and how to learn from that failure so that it can be an effective way to make the treatment plan even more robust. And part of that involves thinking about your audience. Who is it that you're working with to introduce your therapy into the clinic? For example, with Provenge, we were working in the oncology space and we were working in the urology space. So in oncology, it's not at all uncommon to have a catheter placed. Catheter indwelling port can be used for administering medication, chemotherapeutic agents, can be used for blood draws. So when we spoke with the clinical teams in introducing this cell-based therapy into the clinic, it was not unusual for them to consider, all right, a catheter, we'll get one placed. For if peripheral access at the arms was not suitable for apheresis, for cell collection. The challenge became that the catheter that you utilize for chemotherapy is not the same catheter that is used for cell collection for apheresis. And so this was one of our learnings, making sure that the right catheter gets placed. And it was the nurse educator that played a very critical role in making sure that the oncologist and the treatment community in that space understood that not all catheters are created equal, and that for the patient to have a successful experience, you need to have the right catheter placed if it's needed. The other learning was that cell-based therapies are not solutions. And working with the clinical team to understand that these are viable cells that need to be treated gently, that need to be maintained a chain of identity, chain of custody, and maintain their viability was very important. So when the call came in and said, this solution looks cloudy, we were able to communicate, yes, there are cells in that solution, right? And to communicate to the pharmacist, who might have been the individual who was receiving the product because of the way the hospital worked, that no, you do not put them on an agitator and shake them. These were some of the areas where the nurse educators were particularly important, but we delivered that through a process of learning. And this helped us to build confidence within our clinical team and overcome that fear that they encountered by introducing a new platform into their treatment plan. We started with a symphony with multiple instruments and many different players. This is one of the perspectives that I would like for us to consider. Having multiple players on one instrument. Think about cell gene-based therapies and the future of advanced medical therapy, regenerative medicines. How will we make sure that they move early in the disease state? That they aren't preserved strictly for salvage therapies at the end, but that it becomes a cohesive part of a treatment plan for somebody at the point that they are diagnosed. These are some of the thoughts that I don't have all the answers for, but I do know from working in a clinical setting and from also introducing a first-in-class immunotherapy, cell-based immunotherapy, into a clinical setting, that these are the kinds of challenges that one encounters. Where does it get placed into the treatment regimen? Is it something separate and extra, or is it part of a total experience for the patient? So those are my 3 whys. Behind why creating the nurse education platform for introducing new therapies into the clinical setting, particularly with respect to scale and moving out into a commercial space. These were critically important whys from my perspective. Be bold, take big risks, reach beyond your immediate bubble, out into that clinical team, and make failure matter. Dig it apart, tease it out, understand it. And one of the individuals who was here earlier today was talking about how to be more collaborative, is what I was taking away from the process in the treatment planning, and share the learnings, as well as building confidence with your providers and overcoming their fear about how to deliver these new therapies. You may wonder where I'm at today. It is possible to be one of the 15. That was 10 years ago. So I'm inspiring all of you. It is possible to be out there first, to get these therapies out onto the market, and to learn from the experience. I now get to see my 2 sons in college. I'm pleased to say that I'm giving back my extra years to the field and wanting to very much see these therapies move forward so that all patients can benefit from the promise that they will deliver. Thank you very much.